Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. Your host, Tyler Dickerhoff. Glad you're listening in today. Or if you're watching on YouTube, glad to have you. I'm excited today to share with you the conversation I had with Meg Epstein. So Meg is the founder of CA South. They are a commercial development company located in Nashville. They work in the Southeast. They have over $1 billion in assets under management. Let me get that out. Let me, there's only one take in these, just to let you know. If you're listening in, I just do this one take. But I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. One of the things that Meg and I kind of dive into is Meg, came into commercial development, this young, just out of college. She had a finance degree, but yet she wanted to do something more. She kind of didn't want to go sit in a bank, and that led her into development. She shares the stories, how she got started. And then we also take a little jaunt into, I guess, my personal passion. She grew up on a pear orchard, so we talk about the values, the lessons learned being around agriculture, and some of those skill sets that kind of transcend into modern leadership, and or looking for individuals when you're hiring that have a certain ability to them that really make the organization run better. I'm excited for you to listen to this episode. As always, if you get value out of this, share it with someone. I'd appreciate it. I'd love it. If you also get value out of this, send me a message. I'd love to hear. I'd love to be able to pass along anything to Meg. It's exciting to talk to a female entrepreneur that really is aiming to inspire other female leaders, as she leads a pretty large organization now. They do a lot of commercial development in and around Nashville. So I'm excited for you to hear this conversation with Meg Epstein. All right, Meg, good morning. Welcome. Glad you're joining me. Excited to be able to here chat with you, to really have this conversation about leadership. We talked a little bit about before we hit record, what inspires you and what you choose to inspire others, especially as a commercial property developer now with CA South, the firm that you founded. So would love to just kick off and, kind of start there. Is, what is Meg doing today? And then we'll go back in the past, and then we'll jump to the future.
Sure. So currently I run a real estate development and investment management company in Nashville. So that means we build ground up industrial and multifamily buildings, and as well as logistics industrial. But we also manage two private equity funds to invest into the deals. So it's been a long journey getting here, but I have an amazing team, and Nashville's been an incredible place to start. I mentioned earlier, a few of the spots that I love in Nashville. I'd only been to Nashville, I think, for the first time 5 years ago, and I absolutely love the area. My wife and I actually thought about moving there a handful of years ago, but we're pretty enjoy where we're at. But Nashville is a city that I just love, its vibrancy, its energy. And I think kind of, what I've seen a little bit is there's this kind of almost this evolution of, we'll say our age. I'm a 42. I'm guessing you're somewhere in your 30s. And there's this drive to move to Nashville because it's such a vibrant city. It's so endearing and, values based, but yet it is cutting edge and has excitement and has a lot of the fast development. How much of that is a piece of what you guys do? So much of it. I mean, I don't think I could have done what I did in California, where I'm from. I moved to Nashville about 7 years ago and just kind of took advantage of the Southern hospitality. Everyone was so nice. They introduced me to a lot of people, my first couple partners, and just a lot more open-armed than I think being in New York or California and doing business, in terms of people willing to share their contacts or share their investors or that type of thing. It's a lot less competitive, and just not a lot of, I think having an outsider's approach to the Southeast was helpful, because there's so many people moving from New York and California here, but I saw a gap in terms of the market of it being addressing modern design, for example. And so I was able to sort of take advantage of that, having come to Nashville. And, back then the locals were telling me I was paying too much for land, and now I wish I would have bought everything back then, because I saw, such a discrepancy between what people were willing to pay for a home in California and what they could pay for a home here.
So live in Washington, lived in California for about 8 years, lived in the Central Valley, but originally from Ohio. And so the things you describe, I understand very well. And it's kind of, now what's funny is you see California, some real estate, depending where you're at, is actually like even priced with some of the other places in the country. It's amazing to see how much that's changed. But going back to, where you first got started, how did you get into, commercial development?
Yeah, it was kind of, I was in senior year, I spent in Barcelona and kind of had a big transition at that point because I was going to be going into finance, but it was 2008 and I'm so happy I didn't because I'm sure I just would have been laid off, and I sort of derailed my career then because I became very interested in architecture and decided I didn't want to just spend my days in spreadsheets. And so I got a job when I got back. I went to UCLA and I was always running around campus and got a job building luxury homes.
So
for a general
did
contractor.
That start? I mean, you're I love the fun.
Just stop by, this will be a theme. I do run. I'm actually really lazy. I'm not like some marathon. I mean, I have run a marathon, but I'm naturally very sedentary as a person. I hate working out, but I do run to kind of get a landscape of everything, especially when I come to a new place or I'm traveling. And I was traveling around. When I was running around campus, I would stop and look at these amazing building projects happening, and I could see that it was something I wanted to be a part of. And I did want to go into development, but at that time there were absolutely no jobs. And I was so lucky to even get a job in construction because there were so many more experienced people out of work at that point. But I built very high-end homes, and so that was sort of an insulated market at that time because celebrities still need houses even though there's a recession. So it was actually a great time to build. And so I just talked to the project managers a lot and sort of weaseled my way in and got a job completely underqualified. But it was a theme that I even think of with now when I go to hire people. I was very willing. I was, they saw me as very smart. And also I hadn't developed the bad habits that a lot of people in the construction industry had. And so I sort of had a fresh approach to just project management and accounting. And it was a $60 million project, which is the size of a commercial, double the size of my first commercial deal here. And so that sort of, I was able to apply my skill set to that as opposed to, they had a bunch of guys that have been doing concrete for 30 years and, shaking hands on contracts and things like that. You just can't do that. So it was a really fun project management position. I was on the job sites for several years. And then you asked about commercial. So I did that and sort of applied those tools once I got to Nashville. But I've said this before in other interviews and things, but the CCIM courses were very integral to me getting a good foundation for investment analysis and
so can you take a couple minutes and describe that? I never knew it existed. In the preparation of this, I learned about the CCIM, and I think it's an amazing course that honestly anyone that has a desire to be even a little bit invested in real estate, I think would be probably a great course.
It really is. There's a series of courses, and they identify how to look at the macroeconomic development market and where, to identify cycles. And I still use a lot of those principles when looking at, interest rates are rising, supply and demand analysis, basic fundamentals that you need if you're going to be doing development or any sort of real estate investment. And then they go into different product types like office, apartment, retail. And it's a series of courses you take. There's 101, 102, and then you can do add-ons depending on what you're interested in. But it's almost like a little mini master's program. But what's great about it is it's a lot more vocational than, I went to UCLA. It was a great school, amazing basketball, but it really wasn't it wasn't vocational, there's schools that are more vocational. I hate to say it, USC has a really great real estate program, but it's a very academic. I was learning about, political game theory. It's not like I don't really apply any of that.
So You're in a construction zone. I get it. That's your job. It's okay, Meg. Yeah. I mean, it's your life.
I'm always in a construction zone.
It's kind of like at any point, just imagine like what I'm imagining right here. And let's just smile about it. You're watching Mike Rowe. Okay. I'm a huge fan of Mike Rowe. I love what he does. I love how he puts a spotlight on industries that people just kind of like forget about. Like you mentioned concrete, those things that are so pivotal, truck drivers, all those things. And he would cue that perfect, hammer in the background, that saw going off. And that just gives context to what he's doing. So hopefully everyone listening in can appreciate that. Yeah. You're doing your job. It's all good.
Sorry about that. I know. I live amongst construction. I'm building a home right now and a office. So it's just,
so to circle back, one, as you described that kind of getting that first position, and you mentioned that, you didn't have the bad habits. You came in with an outsider's perspective. And I know so many different people have, Liz Wiseman talks about that, how valuable that is to have a different perspective. You're not jaded by what the industry says, oh, this is just the way it is. But I also think about something that you talk about, your finance and that perspective, that if I'm the general and I'm thinking, all right, here's this girl, she keeps coming back. She has no interest in construction, but yet she wants to know, and she has this finance, man, she's going to bring something valuable to the team. Do you think that was a real part of it?
Yes, completely. I think, and I even apply this in hiring. I look a lot more at the person. I mean, in real estate development,
Sure.
You do need people that have experience in it. But for depending on the position, I look a lot more at the attitude, someone's, how quick they are when they speak. We do a series of testing with people to make sure it's a good fit for them as well. But it's, for me, a lot more about the personality and how resourceful someone can be, because if you're smart enough, like, you will figure it out, or you'll ask the right questions, or you'll go online or read a book and figure it out, as opposed to, people that need to be babysat. I think it's more about personality.
I love that.
trait.
And I think that's something that's imperative as, moving forward is it's not about the skills that are on the resume, or like, oh, I can do all these things. Like, what kind of attitude do you bring? And if you bring that, I have no idea what challenge we're going to come up to tomorrow, but I have the confidence that I can figure it out. I mean, I take that's you. I get that impression of, everything you've done. You pick up and move from California to Nashville, and you're like, well, I'm just going to make it happen. There's an element where I believe that's probably a lot of your corporate culture.
Right. Yes, and it can come off a little harsh in hiring and whatnot, but I do it for someone's own sake, because everybody's very high performing on the team, and if someone doesn't follow that, or they don't have that personality, which is totally okay, then they end up struggling. And so it's just kind of better for everybody if we all kind of stick to the same sort of guide.
To kind of circle back, go talk about that, that first experience, but it's probably a mentorship relationship there, right? You first get started seeing how how much did that impact your current leadership style, or what other experiences kind of helped frame the leadership style that you have today?
Yeah, I would say that I'm really, I hire very qualified people, as I said, but I'm pretty hands-off. I'm not a big micromanager. I would say I expect most of the people that work on the team are, this is very much their life. I mean, we do ground up development in Nashville. It's a really sexy, time, and it's really fun what we're doing. But I sort of I really just look at what someone produces, and I don't really get into, office politics or the emotional aspect of anything. And it's something that I just sort of filter, and I just only really focus on what someone's getting done. And I help them that way, making a plan at the beginning of the week for what they're going to get done. And did they meet their goals, setting big goals for the team. that's kind of what I tend to focus on, as opposed to, hey, were you in the office at 8:30 or 8, and how late are you staying, and less about like the time spent. It's really about, okay, like if your job's acquisitions, how many LOIs are you, or how many letters of intent are you bringing me?
Yeah.
How many contracts are you getting, like that? And so we tend to be very utilitarian in that aspect. And I think that that came early on in my career, and I continue to have
Do
that
you
be
think
guiding
that's
principle for
a
sure.
unique personality you have, or is that something you learned?
I definitely learned that. I was very fortunate in that first career to build homes for people that were very successful, right? And because I was young and asking a million questions all the time, that not a lot of them, but they took me under their wings. And throughout my career, until even still, now I answer my investors, or, run a public REIT or larger private equity investors. So I've had exposure to a lot of ultra successful people. And it's just a constant that I've seen in working with those people, is that they just tend to be really focused on results and not process as much, and data driven, which is something that, I use in all of my investment analysis. It's just like really being unemotional and looking at the data, remaining calm, and not getting involved in, too much of the personnel stuff.
As I distill some of that, if you're finding the people that have the right attitudes that will help figure out the process, or maybe you have people on your team that are extremely process oriented and they're great having that laid out, the corporate process. I think from a leadership point of view, the maturity to step back and say, hey, that's not my strength zone. And I gather from you, you're a visionary.
Yeah.
Say, hey, this is what I see as the big opportunity next. This is where we're going. That's what I'm helping leading the team. And I also believe there's an element of the maturity in leadership to when you can say, hey, just get the job done. I trust you. I've put everything around you to be able to succeed. Then it becomes, we're doing it together, as opposed to, I'm watching you to make sure you're getting the results, day in and day out. Like the results are being gauged, but yet it's not, you don't have to have that while I'm constantly watching to make sure they're there, because I've done everything beforehand to allow that to happen. Do you believe if you think about that, that's how it works?
Correct. Yeah. And so, obviously your audience is more entrepreneurial. And I think that's something, if you, listen to how I built this, or other, other entrepreneurial, if you look at a lot of entrepreneurs over time, that is probably more the role, is like setting the big goals and putting the ideas there and being more of a visionary. I have an amazing COO that does deal with a lot of these things, I'm sure, but he's very capable, and he, takes a lot of the smaller operation stuff off of my plate. And that's another big part of being an entrepreneur, is really putting the right key people. I don't have an MBA or a lot of the things that normally a fund manager would, but I've put the right people on the team that get it and have those capabilities that kind of fill the gaps where I don't have the skill set. And so that's what I found to be the most successful. And when you get those key positions filled with the right people, it's exponential
and I think,
growth.
My personal opinion on that, and I've seen this myself, is because when you have that, you don't know what you don't know. And so when you trust them to know it, they bring it, and you're not sitting there second guessing them. You're like, okay, if that's what it is, then great. I trust you. I know that's what's best for us. I may ask questions to clarify so I better understand. But I think what can happen in a lot of cases, you go back to, your first construction job. You didn't know anything about it. And so you couldn't sit there and say, is that the right way to lay concrete? Is that the right way to, set rebar, do all those other things? You're like, oh, if that's what you say is best, I may look for ways to be maybe more efficient, but I don't have this context of, oh, that's the way it's done. Kind of like what you said, is I don't have those bad habits. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Yes, I would definitely agree. Hiring for your weaknesses is definitely a big aspect of it. And, we do large institutional real estate, and I had no background in any of that. But my key 3 executives all, been doing it for decades. So that's definitely been a big
one of the things that,
for sure.
I gathered from you. And again, you seem like this visionary who's willing to just blaze a trail. and say, whatever, I'm driven by this. I have a desire for it. You know, you work in an industry, again, that very few females. I think you're one of the, you know, the first females to ever manage, you know, $1 billion in, you know, real estate development. I think I saw something along those lines. I come from a background in agriculture. You know, 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of females in agriculture at all. There's a lot more now. And I'd love to know, just kind of, you know, share a little bit behind the curtains. One, either how that makes you feel. Like I have a friend that she's, you know, large HR for a large multinational agricultural firm, over 2,000 employees. And she's like, I don't view it as male, female. I just do the job. And I love and appreciate that, because that's more how I've raised. But I also recognize there are situations to where it is, you don't fit here. And so I want to be, you know, cognizant of that. And I'd love to know kind of your experience there. Help me, you know, see the lens in Meg's world, you know, in the construction development industry, how you've navigated through that, or what challenges you've seen.
Okay. First, I have to say, when someone asks me if I wasn't doing this, what would I be doing? I say I want to be a farmer. I love farming, and I grew up on a pear orchard, actually, in Sacramento. But so that's hilarious. But I'm sure this translates across many industries, right? I try hard to not have our work be measured based on that, because if you just look at the fact that, you know, we started in 2017 and we have this much, that alone would be exponential growth and success. And so I try not to have it be that. I have to say, as a woman entrepreneur, I've never felt at all disadvantaged, or if anything, I almost think it's an advantage. I mean, there's a lot of private equity dollars now that chase women-owned businesses, and there's a lot of opportunity for women out there. You know, I am in the South. I go to dinner parties with my husband, and they just assume that we work together, that I'm a real estate agent and he runs a company. You know, I mean, there's all those stereotypes that's just annoying, but it really hasn't affected me in my business. And so, you know, and I would also say that I hope women have as much of an opportunity as I have. I think that they do, if that's what they want. I also realize that, you know, in the South especially, or here, much more than in California, I've noticed that women stay home a lot more. And I think that's cool too. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, someone has to raise the future generation. I've, you know, chosen to wait a little bit longer before we have kids, and I plan to. I don't even know how I'm going to do that with my schedule. But there is a plan. There's a project and a schedule plan for that time. Okay. There's a set time frame, but it is something that, you know, is a lot more challenging, I'm sure. I think that's probably part of being a mother and trying to balance it. It's, you know, it is much harder. And I would just say that I think it's really cool when women, you know, choose that. Yeah. I just think they should have the opportunity to, and not feel like that has to be, because there's a lot of dads out there that are really cool, like stay-at-home dads or whatever, you know? And so I think it's unique. I personally have not experienced any sort of, besides, you know, like sheer ignorance. I've never really experienced any disadvantages from it. And so I would say to encourage, if you're a woman listening, you know, and you have these goals, then it's totally doable. Sky's the limit. Like, go for it.
There's a comment here that I want to ask you about, but I want to frame it in. You know, I think it's human psychology. What we let affect us does. And what we're blind to and we choose to not let it affect us doesn't. You know, I could sit here and say, you know, my limitations from a physical or personal order could affect me if I let it. But if I know it and just kind of choose to overcome it, or almost blind to it, then I don't. And I hear from you, and it's a comment I want to make. You know, you talk about you haven't felt limitations. You've actually seen opportunities being a female business, you know, leader, entrepreneur. So I want to say is it only affects you if you let it. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I mean, in terms of being a woman, you know, I don't know if that's the same for racial diversity or, you know, obviously I can't speak to that, but I think that I would like to see more women and more diversity in what I do. I mean, to be fair, if I think about who runs the funds of all my investors, it's all older white guys, right? I mean, but it is something, because I'm also very young for what I'm doing. And so relative to others that are, in a similar position. So I think if you're mature enough and you can get the results, then you don't have to let it affect you. But it goes back to when in the beginning, I really didn't know anything when I started real estate development. If I had learned about it first, or maybe gone to business school about it, I probably wouldn't have dove in as deep as I did. Now it was a rough first couple of years, and it was the school of hard knocks. But if someone told me when I went and got my first deal funded, if you're doing a $30 million deal, you need 10 million in equity. Well, I would have had to have $1 million. And if I knew that, maybe I wouldn't have even tried. Right. So it's kind of that approach that I think any entrepreneur has. That's sort of like ignorant approach or a naive approach to the world.
It's been shared that the ignorance on fire. And I think there's a certain amount of knowing just enough, but not so much that you psych yourself out. Well, I can't do that because it couldn't be possible. I was supposed to. Why couldn't I? And it's that personal belief. And I think, one, you had that yourself. Probably others poured that into you. But I think I see the opportunity as a leader for you now. And you talk about your, acquisitions agent. It's, pouring belief in them and say, oh, no, we can't get that. Yeah, go get it. Like, why couldn't you? Go try it. I mean, all they could say is no. You may end up in a situation where the guy, the owner, the female, the family is like, you know what? I'd love for that project to be on this property. Let me help you make this work. I just think about that.
Right.
I want to go back to, because you really brightened up when we talked about agriculture. I grew up on a dairy farm. I was a nutritionist for dairy cows for 13 years in California. I lived in Bakersfield before I moved here. I'd love to know about, growing up with a pear orchard, and just how do you feel like those experiences, like you said, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be back there. I'd be doing that. I'd love to know what did you gain from that made you the person you are today?
Oh man, I think I really enjoyed that. I mean, my parents were divorced, but they were, friends, and so I lived in LA I moved around a lot, so it made me a bit shy, but my dad always lived in Sacramento on a pear orchard, and it was just a really great, wholesome home to go back to, and still is. I still go visit him, but it's just sort of, it kind of goes back to, most of the people or investors I work with are based in New York. And, I've read all the books with the guys that started, the related companies, or, Blackstone. And most of them grew up or living in New York in their 20s and grew up with that understanding of the financial markets. And it is something I wish I had had more background on when I started, because I really just went online. But I think that growing up in California gave me it just kind of gave me that entrepreneurial spirit, where I think it didn't have that hardness, right? Because, it was, my parents both didn't go to college. They were very encouraging though, like never limited me to what I wanted to do. There wasn't a lot of like rules or I always had good grades, was like the basic thing. If you have straight A's, you can do whatever you want. I never had a curfew or anything. It was kind of like that sort of upbringing that was wide open spaces, I guess, literally. So I think that definitely helped shape me as an entrepreneur, and I never thought why I couldn't do something, and I actually, when I was studying abroad in Europe and stuff, I spent time with people there, and it's really ingrained, like in the people that live in like Germany, for example. I spent a lot of time there. Like they grow up thinking that you can only do this one thing, and that you have to do this, and it's like da 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 da, and then you do this, and it's like very pre-programmed. And I think that's something that America really has, that gives people the sky's the limit.
You mentioned something there that it's funny when you talk about this autonomy in your workplace, allowing people to just get the job done. My curfew growing up is I had to be up at 4:30. And you say your curfew was just have straight A's. But I also look at that, and to share an example to go back, but also where it came for me is when I was 18, 19 years old, I had an internship. I worked on a farm, and the owner of the farm said, "Hey, I'm working for you today. What are we doing?" And that's been an experience that's been ingrained in me because he wasn't there telling me what to do. Hey, he's leading. He's like, you be the leader. But that was also, I was raised because I was on a farm, it was like, figure it out, man. I can't tell you everything to do, how to do. And that's what I got from what you just said too, is like, you have straight A's, then that's the requirement. What you do in your free time, will help navigate some, but it's you to make the decisions and consequences. And I thought that was really interesting because that's been natural to me to allow people that I work with me to have autonomy. It's like, here's the job, just do it. I don't care how you do it. And you said that's important for you, but I see you just mentioned that's what experience you had growing up too. Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because not everyone has that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are, very controlled and they're told exactly how to do everything. And maybe that's the leader they become because they don't know any different. So I just thought that was a very unique.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know what kind of parent I'll be, but it definitely shaped. And we my whole family gets up at 4:30 too. I can call my mom and dad at 4:30 in the morning because it's the farm life, right? But it's sort of that, no barriers. I think the grades, it's like whatever your measuring stick is, it's like, well, I'm sure they figured I wasn't out partying and doing drugs or something if I'm getting straight A, so it was just a way to. And I always, was very involved and loved school and everything. So
to wrap up, as we move forward, what's next? What's next? What do you see as this great opportunity for, change that CA South has the power to invite people into? I'd love to know kind of what Meg and what your organization sees going forward over the next 5 years of some, challenges in real estate, challenges economically, interest rates rising. We have now more people that are looking for work that maybe it is construction and trades and stuff that, there's tons of need there, right? We are developing, we're at a housing deficit. And so I'd love to hear from you just kind of what you see happening.
Right. So I think for us getting to, the $1 billion milestone was a very big step for us, especially because we had no track record or money when we started. And so that was a great milestone. And I, as the CEO, have to really look to what you just said. And honestly, what we've been able to do really well is we've sort of honed in our niches and really looked for undersupplied. So we tend to be very data driven. We look for undersupplied asset classes. So for condos, for example, I didn't plan and go, every condo I build, I want the owner to be able to short-term rent it, which is what we do. We do short-term rental condos. That's our little niche. Not just regular condos or luxury condos. They can rent them out, right? But I honed in on that through the process where I'm building and building. I'm listening to the brokers. They're telling me this is what's really needed. And then we pivoted and it ended up being very successful. Same thing with our logistics strategy. We appeal to smaller footprint users as opposed to what the big Amazon, big box industrial that most developers focus on. Same with opportunity zones. So we have found our little niches. And me as a CEO, it's really tough to do ground up development. I look at, big, larger institutional funds, and it's hard to get that much AUM, assets under management, with doing ground up development because it takes years to do one project. It's extremely complicated. It's the hardest aspect to do in real estate, depending on the asset class. And so I've had to look and go, just even in the environment the last several months, we price things out. It's 20% more than last year. Meanwhile, all this land sellers in Nashville think that they're sitting on, a gold mine, because they are, but
sure.
The prices of land, people have gotten so unreasonable, and it's like, well, just because it costs me way more to build, that doesn't mean those renters are going to be there wanting to spend 20% more on their rent. And so I think for us, I'm one, we've continued to be we continue to be more institutional, which is something that works very well for us. I've never syndicated funds or asked, the rich uncle for an investment or anything like that. It's more based on institutional investors. And so that means our project sizes have gotten a lot bigger. I think we are going to be right now about 30% of my portfolio is logistics. It's probably going to end up being more like 50%. We're going to be doing more value add because the cost of construction is so high. So I think we will likely expand into other markets is another big step for us. We've gone into Huntsville, but continue throughout the Southeast. I see the Southeast being the future of America, so we'll probably only ever stay in the Southeast, but I'm targeting Charleston, Savannah, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, St. Pete, Greenville, Chattanooga, Huntsville. Those are the markets that I think the future is going. So I'm going to be very heavily focused on logistics, given this environment. And that's just a pivot. And that's what's great about having a few different asset classes. I don't just build office, right? We're nimble enough to be able to go, okay, well, we know we do logistics. Let's really focus on this because this is that market right now. And then the other thing is, we do have some larger, I'll probably veer away from super high-rise projects or things I was looking at or interested in, but it's going to be more larger mixed-use developments that are in our style, our very modern style, but have an all-encompassing aspect to it, and that it includes levels of affordability. We've never been a luxury developer. I've never wanted to build the Four Seasons. I've always wanted to build a luxury middle market, or affordable luxury is what we call it. But it's basically like really nice, clean, modern finishes, but that appeal, but that it's affordable. So I see really focusing on larger mixed-use developments that are done very well and tastefully, more so than I think a lot are, but that are, several $100 million that'll get us through and funded by players that can get us to hold and get us through whatever kind of recession could be coming, or whatever cycles there are, because they're so massive and they're larger. So that's a long way of saying logistics and master plan communities that are kind of encompass my style.
Just to put a opinion on it, I think it's so smart. I agree with it. It's like we build up all of these, multifamilies, but you're like, how are you going to get all the consumables to them? Well, if you aren't building out the logistics centers, all those buildings you built, that's the next gap. Oh, that makes sense. And then I think we're going to fast be into, because we're already there, where yes, people would like to have a single family home. Great. The cost there, the development of that, you know what, then it does come to a multifamily, but it's like, but we want to have a nicer place. We don't want to just have an apartment. We want to have that condo. We want to have that, luxury type condo, but I don't want a $2 to $3 to $5 million condo, because that's just not in our, family, whatever it is. And so I think I like the approach. I think it's very wise. And it's what you mentioned, the ability to be nimble enough to say, hey, what do people want? And I think from a leadership, from a marketing point of view, if you're always kind of focused there, you can keep yourself from becoming the BlackBerry. You can keep yourself from being, oh, well, this is just what we do. You talk about your niche, what that opportunity is. But what I hear in the niche is, your niche is, we're going to serve where other people don't want to. Within these parameters, but that's what I hear. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah.
And it's a great lesson for entrepreneurs, because, I've made that mistake of, when I first got to Nashville, I did a luxury modern home that would be worth, $4 million today, but I was just too early, but that's what I wanted. I came from California, but people, it was just too ahead of its time. And so that's a tough lesson I've had to learn as an entrepreneur, and why I always say, be super data driven. I had our market analytics company tell me in January of 2020 that all the millennials are going to be moving out of the city and they're going to be going to the suburbs. And I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, he told me this 2 months before the recession. And I'm like, no, it's all about urbanization and everyone wants to be downtown and walkable. And then there was this huge flight to the suburbs. I mean, he looks at a lot of information, but it's true. Millennials are growing up now and they need a place to go. So if you really stick to you have to stick to your own convictions, but balance it with data so that you don't make mistakes and be blinded. Because as an entrepreneur, it is important to be a visionary, but you have to be data driven. Otherwise, you can make mistakes and get in trouble.
Take that last point, because I think it's the next big, probably, I don't want to say big, but the real estate opportunity that is going to be converting, retirement communities into young family communities is going to be happening, in my opinion, in the next 10 to 20 years, because we have all these baby boomers that are no longer with us. And then what happens for that senior plus community? It's like, it has to be converted into some other use, because Gen X, we're not big enough to, own all those, to be in all those. So it's, again, that being nimble, but also seeing it beforehand. I love it. Meg, thank you so much for your time. It's been fun conversation. I enjoy hearing about you, learning about you, your experiences, but also taking the lessons that you've learned and, just being willing to do it. And I love that, and I appreciate it. And thanks so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much too. Thank you.
One of the things that my great, opportunity in this podcast is to have conversations with people that I wouldn't necessarily be able to meet. As I talk to her, to have a conversation like we're sitting down at Frothy Monkey in 12 South or Franklin, Tennessee. I just saw a picture of my friend. He was there having coffee this morning. If you're in that area, such a fun coffee shop. And if you're in 12 South, go across the street, get some $5 donuts. A little shout out to both Frothy Monkey, $5. They are not sponsoring the show, but love when I'm in Nashville area to go to those shops. But one of the things that Meg mentioned that really I think is so important, and it's in the context of, you'll see a barrier if you see a barrier, right? If we don't see barriers, if we don't know, like she talked about the experience of coming into construction and she didn't have bad habits. She didn't know what she didn't know. And I think that can be said is, I'll say this again. It only affects you if you let it. It's an attitude and a mindset. Now, don't take that wrong. There are situations where people do things to set you back and challenge you. But I'm going to say again, it only affects you if you let it. Push through it. I've heard from too many people in my life. My wife is an example. She just pushes through. She's like, if I want to do it, I can do it. There's no one stopping me. And I love that attitude. And I got that same thing from Meg. I referenced my friend Molly, who kind of shares the same thing. And I love and admire, and it doesn't matter, in a female situation, it doesn't matter, that's the experience they can speak from. I can speak from my position. The times that have got me down, the opportunities that I've not been able to are the opportunities that I let affect me. And I think as a leader, our great opportunity is to encourage others to say, hey, that situation you're dealing with right now, just don't let it affect you. You have some skill in you that is going to allow you to power through. It's that power of belief that's so powerful that I think the opportunity for a leader to bestow on others is magical. One other thing before I, step out of this episode that I thought was so imperative. We talk about this, amount of autonomy in leadership. And I think that is a virtue in a lot of our societies or organizations, corporations that I think thrived, and leadership styles that thrived during the last 2 years and that will continue, are ones that don't micromanage. They understand what their skill set is. They have the right people in place. And it's saying, hey, here's the measurement. Here's the measuring stick. Just get the job done. And I'm going to cheer you on. And I'm going to help you, knock down hurdles. But I'm not going to tell you how to do everything. I'm not going to control you. And I believe people that have left jobs, look for different opportunities, are looking for those places to where they're not being checked on every hour. They're not being, what time did you show up at the office? What time did you leave their office? They're like, get the job done, go live a life. I think that's so valuable in our society. And it's something I champion. It's something that I've been bestowed. It's been an opportunity given to me as a entrepreneur, business owner, but also as an employee. I've been given that opportunity, and I appreciate it tremendously. Again, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. I want to, again, plant this seed. A new cohort group of the Impact Driven Leader Roundtable will be starting here this summer. If you're interested, want to be a part of that, I'd love for you to join. send a message to tyler@tylerdickerhoff.com. We'll make sure we get you signed up, reserved to be a part of that. And again, thanks for always listening in, being a great audience. Appreciate it. Until next time, have a good one.